This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review and Company, and this is the Lenovo ThinkPad X1 Yoga again. Now, we reviewed this earlier in the year, and it was one of the nicest 14-inch ultra portables on the market. Thin, light, 2.8 pounds, carbon fiber, a lot going for it, but then it had the IPS displays, Full HD and QHD available. Now we finally have the OLED model in-house. They announced it long ago, but it took that long to get it. Still pretty hard to find, still it's expensive. We're going to find out if it's worth it now. So, as a recap, the X1 Yoga is a 14-inch ultra-portable ultrabook with 15-watt dual-core i5 and i7 CPUs. Currently still at the Skylake generation. I'm sure they'll be refreshing at some point to Kaby Lake. Not that that makes a huge difference, honestly, other than a little better battery life. 8 to 16 gigs of RAM. It has an M2 SSD. You can get it with PCIe if you want. You can upgrade it yourself afterwards. You can unscrew the bottom and access that and the Intel AC8260 Wi-Fi card. It's a lovely machine. It has a best-in-class backlit keyboard, a fantastic trackpad, a fingerprint scanner, and Wacom AES digitizer with a Wacom active pen. Now, this is the one that fits in the silo in the machine. You can get a bigger one if you want. It's the ThinkPad Pro pen, although it's confusing when you order it because it says Pro Pen, but what you get is this little guy. So you can get a bigger pen, and it's very nice, actually. I like it. It has lower initial force of activation than N-Trig, say, on Surface Book and Surface Pro 4. It's great for drawing. But the OLED display is what we're really here to talk about today, because that's the new feature that everybody's been waiting for. It's QHD resolution, 2560 by 1440. So that's a perfectly fine resolution at 14 inches. And one nice thing that Lenovo has done here, well, you can see we have OLED power settings. We'll visit that in a minute. But we're going to go to color settings first. So this is something important because OLED panels have very wide color gamut, and this one indeed does have 99% of Adobe RGB. Pretty much full NTSC coverage and more than sRGB by far. Things can get a little crazy, especially because Windows itself really is not a managed color space. Even if you calibrate the machine, Windows itself really doesn't do much with it. Now, programs like Photoshop do, and I'll show you the difference in that. But we're using Photo Pro as a setting right here. That is Adobe RGB setting, so wider than your sRGB color gamut. If you want to go for standard, and you might be able to see the subtle change in the screen there, and actually a little greener, which is interesting. Now, our camera is recording in sRGB. What the web uses, what YouTube uses is sRGB, so it may actually be hard for you to see the extended gamut on some of the stuff and some of the changes. So standard sRGB will look the least garish or oversaturated if you're using just Windows desktop, and depending on the program you're using. Movie Pro is DCI P3, the same thing that Apple's been pushing a lot lately, and let's see if you can see the difference there. That's awful green and yellow. It's just not really very good. Now, they actually tell you the gamma setting and the white point setting. Sometimes these are accurate, sometimes they aren't. I can tell you that our Spider 4 Pro colorimeter said that the Photo Pro Adobe RGB was the most accurate, almost perfectly calibrated. sRGB, not so much. Movie Pro, which is the P3 standard, not so much. And you've also got blue light cuts and all that sort of thing. And you can try to roll your own, although because these are not necessarily so accurate, even if you pick a 2.2 gamma, it's not set in stone that you're going to actually get that as a result. I would say stick with Photo Pro if you're doing professional photo and video work, and check it with a calibrator, and then let Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Premiere do the color management, because they do. So let's just go back for a minute and take a look at our other settings that are available. So OLED has a tendency to burn in. I think a lot of you have heard about that. So we have some things here. Taskbar dimmer, for example. By default, they're using a black one, which is a good idea. Black is not going to burn in. You can have a background dimmer, which dims everything but the main window, which is kind of weird looking. And you have display dimming. You can enable that to be more granular than the power setting plan. So I have not seen any burn-in yet. Of course, you know, after having this around for a month, that might not be enough to do burn-in, but it's something to be mindful of. Do not leave an OLED display displaying the same thing for 30 minutes. Make sure that your screen is set to shut off after at least like 5 minutes or something like that. Response times on this are, in theory, infinite. You may see a little bit of ghosting, though, because the nature of OLED is sometimes the pixels actually don't switch colors. But in theory, it's infinite. Your contrast is near infinite. It's so high that it's kind of at the point where you're going to call it infinite. Black levels are 0. I mean, black is black. You think the display is off. So with brightness set to max, you can see what our colorimeter measured. And by the way, if you don't know what a colorimeter is, this is it. It's a USB device. You put it right on the display. That's what the sensor area looks like. Plugs it into a USB port. So our spider colorimeter measured at 364.2 nits of brightness when we had brightness set to maximum. Stupendous, right? See, black is 0. Contrast, that's just a lot of numbers there. So that's why we say near infinite when it gets that high. The white point should be 65 to 6600 degrees Kelvin, and that's what the laptop says, or Lenovo's control panel. Obviously, it's a bit off there. That's a bit lower or warmer than it should be, but that's life, and you can calibrate around that happily. And here's our perfect 2.2 gamma. That is right spot on right there. The black line is the one that we care about, matching the teal blue line there, and not the green one. And here's the grayscale ramp. Well, it's not exactly even, is it? It's OLED laptop displays, a few of them that are on the market, are not the same as your OLED TV, because OLED TVs have they're calibrated at the factory, and they have a managed color space. So this gets to be a little bit more dicey, so don't expect this to be as perfect as your TV. Now, if we take a look at the sRGB setting, or what they call standard, see how different the gray ramp is there? Ideally, you would always want your gray ramp to be the same and to be an even ramp and not go kind of whoops quite so much. And for gamut, of course, it's extremely high. NTSC, 94% of NTSC. And 100% of Adobe RGB and well over sRGB, which is the everyday color space, like I said. That's used by Windows, that's used for the web, for anything that's online based. Adobe RGB is, because it's so close to CMYK, it's usually used for print output. Now, this is a glossy display, unlike the semi-matte displays that are available for the other X1 Yoga. So there is plenty of glare here. It's shiny, but happily it's bright enough to overcome that. But yeah. Now, one thing about OLED displays is they use an RGB backlighting, and it's less directional than IPS. That means that as you rotate the display, you won't really see a drop in brightness or a shift. However, notice the color shifting here. There's a lot more color shifting than in your typical IPS display. It's even more noticeable if you've got a whitish background that turns to kind of a yellow-green, and you move it forward and backward too. It's not bad like a TN panel, but it's something to keep in mind. If you're doing things that require color accuracy, you want to keep the display angled so it's pretty much straight on facing at you. Don't go moving it around a lot, because you might see a bit of a shift in color. And for things that need extreme accuracy, then that's an issue. Now, for those of you who are sensitive to color, by which I mean you're trained to look at color, you're probably looking at this and saying, oh, Disneyland there, that's oversaturated. And it is. This is a photograph I took in the sRGB color space using a Sony A7 camera. And I can tell you, neither the colors in person nor the photograph that I took on any other monitor, including a wide gamut 28-inch display, look like that. That's because Windows does not manage color really beyond the sRGB color space. So before you lose heart and say, oh my God, so I can't use this for professional work, Adobe Photoshop uses a managed color space. Now this may be hard to see in sRGB using a camera capturing it, but let's just move this a little bit to the side. I think you can see the difference in the colors here. So you can see here what is a, blown out kind of cerulean blue becomes a more realistic, manageable blue. The grass actually picks up a little bit more of a yellow hue, which is natural, versus the kind of blue-greeniness that you see on the desktop. So as you can see, if you're working inside of Photoshop, all is good and it's wonderful. And particularly for those of you who do work in the print color space where you need full Adobe RGB representation, then this is just fantastic stuff right here. Same thing goes for Premiere Pro, because you've got a managed color space. Even the Windows Photos app, which is a freebie that comes with Windows 10, does a better job here. This doesn't look so outlandish, does it? But look at the beautiful glow and the warmth, which actually is for real. That's how the photo should look, and that's how the cat did look. Lucky cat there. Black and whites look pretty good in terms of the grayscale representation right there. And obviously the contrast just brings out the detail and the dark tones really nicely. Especially, oh, this is nice here. You can just about see the strands in her hair, things that can get lost on monitors that don't have that good a contrast ratio. And of course that is a brightly colored photo, so it looks good. This is really, really, really nice stuff right here. So yes, it's good. Don't be worried when you see that Windows desktop, or even if you're streaming something like Netflix. You're probably going to see colors that are better than life. And for a consumer standpoint, certainly having your HDR TV option on, you're probably actually going to say, oh, that looks kind of nice, a little zingy, but hey, cool. And this is Alias Sketchbook Pro. Also, the color space is managed nicely here. And just since we've been spending a lot of time with the Surface Book Performance base, I just want to mention this as an alternative. We've already done a smackdown of the regular IPS version of this versus the previous edition of the Surface Book. This Wacom AES pen just really has a nice feel to it, and this is just the beginnings of a sketch here of some mountains, but initial force of activation is very nice and light on this. You've got a beautiful display to look at with plenty of color saturation and contrast, so it's actually pretty nice for those of you who want to do artwork. And of course, it does the yoga thing, so you can use it like so. And it does tent mode and all those other things too. So yeah, 2.8 pounds is pretty heavy to hold, but I usually typically put this on a desk when I'm drawing or in my lap, or I wedge something underneath it like a tablet stand, and it does the job just fine. So it's also a nice alternative. Now when it comes to pricing and availability, here's kind of a gotcha. Right now it's pretty hard to get one of these, the new OLED model. They've been shipping for about a month now or so, but you still just really, it's not easy to find them, and they're not even on Lenovo's website at the moment, but some retailers do have them. The price is also high. Now this is the end of 2016, and Lenovo's having some great sales on the model with the IPS displays. You can get a really nicely configured one with the QHD IPS display for around $1,375 right now with the Core i7 and a nice big SSD inside. So, you know, but this one, there's no discounts. So if you find it, it's going to be back to the old price, which we saw when this first came out in the spring. And that's around $1,800 with the Core i5 and around $2,100 with the Core i7. So it is not cheap. Of course, the competing Surface Book is not cheap either, and that's the Surface Book with Performance Base right next to it. So you can see that's also a really nice display, and it doesn't have the problem of looking oversaturated because it's 100% of sRGB, a little bit better than that, and about 76% of Adobe RGB. But if you need that extra color gamut and that phenomenal contrast ratio, of course, Surface Book is very high, like 1700 to 1 contrast ratio, but still, there you have it. That one starts at $23.99 for the one with the performance base, or you can get it without the performance base starting at $1,500. So you get the idea. If you want to play and in these nice displays, it's going to cost you some money. And just as a reminder, we already did a full review of the ThinkPad X1 Yoga earlier in the year. There's a link down below. Take a look, and you can learn everything else you want to about this laptop if you haven't already watched that review. And of course, we have our written review too. So that's the ThinkPad X1 Yoga with OLED display. Still one of the neater Ultrabooks around. Very portable, very light. Now with the beautiful display, what do you think? Yeah, pretty good, right? It's definitely one of the nicer Ultrabooks on the market, and it has a fantastic display. If you can live with some of the color calibration issues and the fact that Windows doesn't really support wide gamut displays very well, it's worth the price. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to read our written review and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and occasional cats.